Welcome to grade 6. This is your first lesson, and in this lesson we're going to learn about what are called input-output machines. And later on this is going to turn into creating expressions and relations and working with graphing and a lot of other stuff, but we have to start somewhere. So here's the beginning. In this lesson what I want you to be able to learn is how to create an input-output machine, recognize the mathematical functions. That means what happens to change the number from the input to the output. And we'll work a little bit more with rules and relations later. So if you take a look at the textbook, there's a couple things I want you to note first about your textbook. This is the first lesson, so remember that in your textbook you have a table of contents. If you have any terms you don't understand, you can go to the back. There's a miniature dictionary there. At the very back's an index where you can look things up. There usually is a mid-unit review you can use to help yourself to do some extra work with. And of course, at the end of the unit, there's a review. And there's also, as you go through it, there's different cumulative reviews. So you should take a look through your textbook and find these things, and they'll help you to review. But that's not for now. For now, let's start talking about input-output machines. So we're going to create a machine. This is kind of a mathematical, magical machine. And what you do is you have what's called the input. Now this input is something that you're going to put into the machine. Now when you put this input, which is a number, into this machine, something's going to take place. There's going to be some math that takes place. Now we don't know what that is. That's your goal, is to guess what this math is. Now the math machine will spit out the output. Input goes in, output goes out, and something happens in the middle. This is a one-step machine. We're going to be going later where there's going to be two different things happening, but we won't get ahead of ourselves. So this is the input, the math magic, and the output. The numbers which we place are called the inputs. The numbers that come out are the outputs. For example, if I place a 3 in here, look what happens. Here I'm going to put a 3 in. Now what happens in here we don't know, but we do know that the output is 6. Now what happened here? Well, you could take a look and you could say, well, it's pretty simple. We just multiplied by 2. But are you sure? What if we didn't multiply by 2? What if we added 3? So there's two possibilities here. Okay. In fact, there's an infinite amount of possibilities. We could have multiplied by 3. That would have given us 9, and then subtracted 3. We could have multiplied by 10, got 30, and then subtracted. So there's a lot of different things that could happen. So I know the only way we're going to be able to find out what actually took place in here is to have more options. So we know that we could add 3 here, or we could multiply by 2. So how can we be sure? Well, we have to put in another input. So here we go. Put in the input of 4. What happens? We get an 8 out. Now, we had an option up here to be multiplied by 2 or add 3. If you added 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, that works. But 4 plus 3 does not make 8. The math magic has to be the same. It doesn't change. Whatever you input, the same thing has to happen to both numbers, and that gives you your output. So the 4 plus 3 would be 7, so we know right now that we can take out this one right here. It cannot add 3. And that means that we only have one other option, and that's to multiply by 2. So we know that, there we go. We know that what's happening here is we're multiplying by 2. So going down here, finish off the rest of this table. Okay, so 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 2 is 10, and 6 times 2 is 12. So can you fill out the rest of the table? Well, this just tells you the input of 5 gives you an output of 10. The input of 6 gives you an output of 12. This is what we're going to be working with in this lesson. Can you come up with a table and fill it out? So let's go to another example. All right, so the input this time is going to be a 3 again, but now my input is a 5. Okay, now we could add 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. Or we could multiply by 1 and 2/3, which also gives you 5. But I think it's pretty obvious that since you haven't been into multiplying fractions, that you're going to have a really good idea what's happening here. So these are the possibilities. In order to make sure, we have to do another one. So here's 4. And if we're adding 2, this one should be 6, and it is. So what took place? We added 2. So now, pause the recording, and I want you to fill in the table. All right, so this is what your table should look like. 0 plus 2 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 4, 3 plus 2 is 5, 4 plus 2 is 6, and 5 plus 2 is 7. You'll notice that the output has a pattern. It's going up by the same amount each time. So once you know this pattern goes up by 1, starting at the 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5. So your output pattern, that's just straight output, is going up by 1. Your input pattern is also going up by 1, but your input-output pattern is going up by 2. So you'll notice in this situation you have 3 patterns. You've got the input pattern, you've got the output pattern, and then you have the input-output pattern. Okay? Next example. Input's going to be 24. Output is going to be 6. Ooh. Well, what did we do? Well, we could have subtracted 18, or we could have divided by 4. The only way to be sure is to create another example. So in this case, this is 20. Going in, we've increased, so we've dropped this time. Your input's actually decreasing by 4. And your output is now 5. So we can now see that 24 divided by 4 is 6. 20 divided by 4 is 5. So we're pretty confident now that we're dividing by 4. So pause the recording and fill out the rest of the table. All right, so here is your examples. 24 divided by 4 is 6. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So in this situation, your input rule is decreasing by 4 each time. Your output rule is decreasing by 1 each time. And your input-output rule is dividing by 4. All right. Now comes the harder ones. These are called two-step machines. And what happens here is you're going to do 2 mathematical functions. You're going to either multiply or divide first, and then you're going to add or subtract after that. So there's, you have to figure out what's going on. Now don't worry, it's not that difficult if you follow the process that I'm going to give you. But let's see if we can do one just with your abilities before I show you some of the tricks. Okay, so our input's 1. And our output's going to be 7. Okay, well we could add 6, or, well, let's just put these out here. Or you add 6, multiply by 7, multiply by 5, and then add 2. We could multiply by 3, and then add 4. We could multiply by 10, and then subtract 3. There's lots of different possibilities, and there's no way you can figure out what it is from 1. So we have to go to the next example. So here's your next example. Input 2, and we get a 9. All right, so we know that let's go up here. The third input is this one. Put in a 3, we got 11. So we have 7, 9, 11. Okay, well I think that by using the output pattern, you can pretty well figure out what the 4 and 5th output are going to be, because you're going up 7 to 9 is adding 2. Right? 9 plus 2 is 11, so 11 plus 2 would be 13, and 13 plus 2 would be 15. So we can pretty well figure out what those are. So that would be our our output rule. We're going and adding 2 starting at 7. Here, our input is simply adding 1 starting at 1. But here's the hard one. How do you go from the 1 to the 7, then the 2 to the 9, then to the 3 to the 11? Well, there is some tricks here. Okay? What you do is you take a look at what this is increasing by. If this is increasing, that's what you multiply by. So you can see that our output is increasing by 2. That means that we're going to be multiplying by 2. All right, so that's our first step. Multiply by 2. Now, let's go over here and see what happens. 1 times 2 is 1. Sorry, back up. 1 times 2 is 2. But we don't have a 2. We have a 7. So how do you get from a 2 to a 7? Well, in this case, you add 5. Now, this is our guess. Let's find out whether or not this actually works. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 5 is 9. Hey, that worked. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 5 is 11. 4 times 2 is 8. Plus 5 is 13. So we know that this here, multiplied by 2, add 5, is correct. Okay? So if you follow the process, 1, find out what the output's going up by. If it's going up, you multiply. If it's going down, you divide. Okay? And then you have to figure out how to get from the multiplication of the first term, 1 times 2, when you find that product or that answer, how do you get from that answer to what you get your output? And that will be your second step. All right, let's try another one. Okay, this is just basically telling you the same thing I just did. Okay, so let's see if you can figure this out without me going and helping you. So I want you to try it first. Okay, so pause the recording and see if you can figure out this one here. Okay, well, first thing you need to do, what's the output doing? The output in this case is going up by 3. So our first step is to add 3. Well, what's 1 plus 3? Well, 1 plus 3 is 3, isn't it? But we don't have a 3, we have a 1. So to go from a 3 down to a 1, we have to subtract 2. So let's see if this works. All right, 1, sorry, I got this wrong. This should not be add 3, it should multiply by 3. Okay, remember, what you go up by is what you multiply by. So we're going up by 3's, we multiply by 3. 1 times 3 is 3, but we have a 1. So to get from a 3 to a 1, you subtract 2. 2 times 3 is 6. To get to a 4, you subtract 2. 3 times 3 is 9. To get to a 7, you subtract 2. 4 times 3 is 12. To get to a 10, you subtract 2. So we know we multiply by 3, and then we subtract 2. And you'll find that that's your answer. Multiply by 3, that's what 3x means. We'll get more of this a little bit later. 3 times the number, subtract 2, and x is the number. All right, pause the recording and see if you can do this one. All right, so let's find out what we're doing here on the output rule. Okay, our first step here, we're starting with 5, we're going to a 9, and a 13, and a 17. So we're going up by 4. So if you're adding 4 each time, remember what this goes up by, that's your multiplying. So we're going to multiply by 4. Whatever you go up by, that's what you multiply by. So now let's find out what happens. 1 times 4 is 4. But we don't have 4, we have a 5. So to get from the 4 to the 5, you have to add 1. Okay, so let's see if this works. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 1 is 17. So in this case, we're multiplying by 4. 4 times a number, when they're side by side like that, that means you're multiplying. 4 times a number plus 1. Now don't worry about this too much. Your job is not to come up with this. That's just something else. Your job is to come up with this right here. All right. So these are achievement test questions. And here is a question that you would get on your provincial achievement test in June. All right, so it says here, use the following information to answer question 12. And here's question 12 down here. So here we go. Input 1, 2, 3, 4. Output 4, 7, 10, 13. Okay, so what's happening here? All right, we're going up by 3's. So that means you're going to multiply by 3, because we're going up by 3. Now, 1 times 3 is 3. We need to get to a 4, so we have to add 1. All right, so I'm just curious. I think I might have just done this one. Did I just do this one? Multiply by 3, subtract 2. No, I guess I didn't. After a while, these become very similar. All right, so here we go. You're going up by 3's. 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 3 is 10, plus 3 is 13. That means our first step is going to be to multiply by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. And 3 has to get to a 4. So to get from a 3 to a 4, you add 1. So that works. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So it says here, which of the following statements describes the relationship between the input and the output of the table? So what happens when you go from 1 to 4, 2 to 7? And they give you some choices. Multiply the input by 4. Well, we know that's incorrect because we're not going up by 4. Double the input and then add 2, right? Well, 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 gets us 4, but 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 2 would give us 6, so this one doesn't work. 3 doubled would be 6, and 2 more, 7, 8, that should be an 8, so this one is out. Let's take a look at this one. Double the input and add 4. Well, 1 doubled is 2, plus 4 is 6, so that one's out. And down here, multiply the input by 3, and then add 1. And you can see that's what we came up with over here. So the correct answer here is D. Here's another question, another very similar one, only this time they've got you going in table of values going sideways. That's not a big deal. That just means that your input output's going to go this way. All right. So we start with a 1, we got a 3, start with a 2, get a 5, 3 to a 7, 4 to a 9, and 5 to 11. So let's take a look what happens here. We're going up by 2s. That's your output rule right here along the bottom, okay? All right. So if you're going up by 2s, that means that we're multiplying by 2. So that's our first step. Well, let's find out if it works. 1 times 2 is 2. We have a 3. So that means we have to add 1 in order to get to the 3. Let's find out if it works for the 2. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So we know it works. So here's the options that they give you to choose from. All right, now don't worry about the format. We'll get to this later in the year, all right? But what you're looking for is multiplying by 2 and then adding 1, and that's this one down here. 2x's, you multiply the number by 2 and you add 1. So that's basically the correct answer. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to give you, at this point you can stop the recording and you can go on to the assignment, or if you want you want some extra practice, you can hang around for a bit. I'm going to do a couple more examples here for you. All right, so this is extra for you if you're having difficulty. So this is what I want you to take a look at. Pause the recording and see if you can figure out what this is going to be. 1 to 5, 2 to 9, 3 to 13, etc. Okay, well, the first thing you need to do, what is the output rule? What's happening here? We're going up by 4. 5 plus 4 is 9. 9 plus 4 is 13. 13 plus 4 is 17, etc. So we're going up by 4. If you're increasing by 4, that means we have to multiply by 4. So let's find out what happens when we multiply by 4. 1 times 4 is 4, but we need a 5. So we have to add 1. So there's your rule. Multiply by 4, add 1. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, where is my next one? Extra examples. There we go. I'm supposed to have 3 pages here. Oh, okay. I started on the last page. All right, so here we go. Take a look at this one and see if you can figure out what the rule is going to be. 3 to 6, 4 to 8, 5 to 10, 6 to 12, 7 to 14. So pause the recording and try to do this one. Okay, so take a look at this. We're going to find the output rule first. That's what's happening here. 6 to 8, you're adding 2. 8 plus 2 is 10. So what we're doing here is we're multiplying by 2. Okay, so that's our first step. Multiply by 2. All right, let's see. So 3 times 2 is 6. Well, we got 6, so that means you don't have to add or subtract anything. That means you're done. If you just have to multiply by 2, 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 2 is 10. You don't have to add or subtract anything. So your answer, multiply by 2. All right, here's another one for you to try. Pause the recording and see if you can find this rule. Okay, so what are we going up by? Well, if you're going up by 1s here, so that means that whatever the input is, you're going to multiply it by 1. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Multiply by 1. Okay. All right, so let's see what happens when we do this. 0 times 1 is 0. Now, if you're not sure about the 0 rule, go to the 1 rule. 1 times 1 is 1, but we get a 3. So to get from a 1 to a 3, you have to add 2. So there's your rule. Multiply by 1 and add 2. All right, next one. Here we go. I want you to try this one here. 24 to 6, 20 to 5, 16. So pause the recording and see if you can find that rule. Okay, so what is our output rule here? This time we're going down by 1. Okay, this is a difficult one. Okay, because you look at your input over here, it is going down by 4s. So we have a problem here. You cannot get to You can't use the rules that we normally would do here. So you're going to have to use your imagination. How do you get from a 24 to a 6? How do you get from a 5 to a 20? Well, you can for a second, if you want to, look at it backwards. How do you get from a 6 to a 24? How do you get from a 5 to a 20? How do you get from a 4 to a 16? Well, this is multiplication by 4. So 6 times 4 is 24, 5 times 4 is 20, 4 times 4 is 16. Now remember, that's output to input, and we have to do input to output. So what's the opposite of multiplying by 4? So in this case, this one is divide by 4. It's a little bit more difficult. All right, let's have you try this one over here. Pause the recording and see if you can come up with this one. Okay, 1 to 7, so we need our output rule first. So what's happening here? 7 to 9 to 11, we are going up by 2. If you are increasing by 2, that means your first step is to multiply by 2. All right, so let's find out what happens when we multiply by 2. 1 times 2 is 2, but we don't have a 2, we have a 7. So to get from a 2 to a 7, you have to add 5. All right, so let's check it out. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 5 is 9, that works. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 5 is 11, that works. So this is correct. And I think this is the last one you have to work with, so pause the recording and see if you can figure this one out. All right, so what are we going up by here? Our output rule, we are going up by 3's. 1 plus 3 is 4, 4 plus 3 is 7, 7 plus 3 is 10, etc. So we're increasing by 3, we're adding 3. That means we have to multiply by 3. I'll leave the spelling error there. Okay? Now, 1 times 3 is 3, but we don't have a 3. We have a 1. So how do you get from the 3 back to the 1? We have to subtract 2. All right? So let's see this works here, okay? We have 1 times 3 is 3. Take away 2 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6. Take away 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. Take away 2 is 7. So we know that it works. Okay? And we've already done this one here. So hopefully this helps. If you're having any difficulty, you can come and talk to me. But get started on your assignment. Okay? And we'll see you in lesson 2.